What the hell do you think you're doing with that tin star, boy?
Watch that boy shit, redneck. You talking to the sheriff of Rock Ridge.
For 50 years, fans thought they understood Blazing Saddles. But a hidden interview clip from 2025 changed everything. Gene Wilder revealed the truth about the Waco Kid, and it wasn't funny at all. From deleted emotional scenes to a last-minute casting disaster, secret lawsuits, and jokes too explicit to air, the story behind this film is darker, messier, and more shocking than anyone imagined. What was Gene really doing in that jail cell? And why did the studio try to bury it? Let's find out. A Western on the brink. The story behind Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles should never have worked. In fact, it was never supposed to make it past the first week of filming. It was too loud, too weird, too profane, and far too honest for 1974 Hollywood. Studio executives didn't get it. Critics feared it, and even the cast sometimes questioned what kind of film they were making. It had fart jokes, racial slurs, horses punched in the face, and scenes that broke every filmmaking rule of the time. But somehow, against all odds, it not only survived, it became one of the most culturally explosive comedies of all time. So how did this mess of satire, slapstick, and chaos become a classic? Why did it work? And more importantly, what secret was hiding in plain sight the whole time? The idea for Blazing Saddles began as a joke about Westerns, but quickly evolved into a political grenade. Released in 1974 during a period of immense social upheaval in the United States, the film was co-written by Mel Brooks, Norman Steinberg, Andrew Bergman, Alan Yuger, and most crucially, Richard Pryor. Pryor's voice is what gave the film its edge, not just in punchlines, but in its brutal honesty about American racism. The story follows a black railroad worker who becomes the sheriff of a white frontier town, and every white character loses their mind over it. Instead of softening the satire, the writers leaned in, creating a comedy that laughed at bigotry by exposing how ridiculous and how real it was. From the beginning, the studio hated what they were seeing. Warner Brothers executives demanded rewrites, cuts, and changes to the script's most controversial material. They were nervous about everything: the racial jokes, the language, the meta-humor, the fart scene. At one point, an internal memo even requested the removal of all scenes involving a certain ethnic slur, only to be ignored by Mel Brooks, who argued that the film couldn't make a point about racism if it wasn't allowed to show it. The studio also insisted that the ending, which breaks the fourth wall and turns the Western into a Hollywood studio brawl, was too absurd to work. But Brooks refused to compromise. The production barely held together as a result. There were constant arguments over what could stay, what had to go, and whether the film would even be released. Then came the casting disaster. Originally, the role of the Waco Kid, the washed-up gunslinger with a drinking problem, was given to Gig Young. On paper, it made perfect sense. Young was an Oscar-winning actor with a reputation for playing hard-edged, charismatic men. But on the first day of filming, it became clear something was terribly wrong. Young showed up shaky, sweating, and slurring his lines. At first, the crew assumed he was playing the character with a method approach. But by midday, he collapsed on set and had to be rushed to the hospital. He was experiencing severe alcohol withdrawal, and he never returned. Filming stopped. The entire project was now hanging by a thread, with no time to recast, and the studio breathing down everyone's neck. Mel Brooks didn't panic. He picked up the phone and called Gene Wilder. He didn't audition, didn't ask for the script, and didn't know what he was flying into. He just said yes, boarded a flight, and showed up the next morning, jet-lagged, unprepared, and ready to rescue a film that was falling apart. Behind the camera, things weren't any calmer. The set was unpredictable. Actors broke character mid-scene. Crew members couldn't stop laughing. And Mel Brooks was directing with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun disaster. The film's tone shifted scene by scene. Part Western, part Looney Tunes, part savage political satire. Nobody, not even the cast, was entirely sure what they were making. But in the middle of all this chaos stood Gene Wilder, doing something no one expected. He wasn't cracking jokes. He wasn't playing for laughs. He was quiet, calm, still. And as the madness swirled around him, he became the eye of the storm, the one thing holding it all together. But the real shock? What he was doing wasn't in the script, and it wasn't something anyone saw coming. The emergency recast that saved the movie. In May of 2025, a buried interview clip suddenly resurfaced online, and it changed everything we thought we knew about Blazing Saddles. At minute 37, Gene Wilder, calm and unassuming, quietly drops a revelation. "I didn't play the Waco Kid for laughs. I played him for pain." That sentence didn't just stun fans, it blew open 50 years of misunderstanding. Wilder wasn't delivering deadpan comedy. He was playing a man on the edge of collapse. And the most shocking part? That performance only happened because the original actor physically collapsed on the first day. What started as a production crisis turned into one of the most quietly radical choices in the history of American comedy. When production began on Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks believed he had the perfect Waco Kid, Gig Young, an Oscar-winning actor with the right mix of charm and gravitas to play a washed-up gunslinger. Young had done serious drama, westerns, and crime thrillers. He knew how to carry weight without dragging down a comedy. But the moment he arrived on set, something was off. He looked sweaty, jittery, and distracted. His speech was slurred. His hands trembled. Some crew members assumed he was taking a hyper-realistic approach to playing a drunk. But the truth was that Young was in acute alcohol withdrawal, a medical emergency that, if untreated, can be fatal. By the end of his first morning on set, he had collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital and immediately removed from the production. The studio went into crisis mode. Shooting had barely begun. The budget was already tight. Recasting so early meant delays, contract renegotiations, and serious risk that Warner Brothers would pull the plug entirely. It was the kind of behind-the-scenes meltdown that quietly kills a movie before it even gets made. But Mel Brooks wasn't interested in panic or protocol. Instead of launching a formal search, he picked up the phone and called one person, Gene Wilder. Wilder wasn't anyone's first choice for the role. He wasn't on any casting shortlist. In fact, he had no prior interest in the project at all. But Mel trusted him. They'd worked together on The Producers, and Brooks knew that Wilder was reliable, quick on his feet, and fearless under pressure. When he called, Gene didn't ask for a script or a contract, or even what the role entailed. He just said, "Okay, I'm coming." He got on a plane that night. Within 24 hours, he was on set, jet-lagged, unshaven, and completely unrehearsed. So what does an actor do when he's given no time to prepare, no direction, and no rehearsal? In most cases, they panic. They overact. They fumble their way through the first few takes. But not Gene. The moment the camera started rolling, he lowered himself onto the jail cell bunk, slouched with the perfect balance of exhaustion and detachment, and delivered one of the most disarming character introductions in movie history. The line was simple, Are we awake? But the way he said it rewrote the tone of the film. You could hear the hangover in his voice. You could feel how much this man had given up. It was no longer just a funny drunk with a fast draw. It was something darker, heavier, and more human. The power of that performance becomes even clearer when you contrast it with the rest of the film. Blazing Saddles is unhinged, filled with fart jokes, racist town halls, horses getting punched, characters breaking the fourth wall, and a climax that spills off the Western set and into a movie studio cafeteria. Everything is dialed up. But Wilder, somehow, stayed still. Even when the jokes are landing hard, he plays them like confessions, not punchlines. In the jailhouse scene where he reveals he can't shoot straight anymore because of the shakes, his eyes don't move. He doesn't grin. He just tells it like a man reliving a moment that broke him. And audiences laughed. But what they were really reacting to was the recognition of pain hiding under humor. Mel Brooks later said that Wilder gave the movie its backbone, and he wasn't exaggerating. While characters like Hedley Lamar and Mongo went full cartoon, the Waco Kid brought a strange gravity to the screen. And the genius of Wilder's acting was in the contrasts. In one scene, he's drinking from a bottle hanging upside down, barely conscious. In the next, he's giving Bart a quiet monologue about what it means to be hated before you even speak. That balance between absurd physical comedy and emotionally real dialogue was never written into the role. It was Wilder's invention. And this is where the recent resurfaced footage from that French interview hits even harder. When he said, "I played him for pain," he meant it. The Waco Kid wasn't just drunk. He was traumatized. He was the ghost of an older America, too worn out to fight, but too self-aware to pretend nothing happened. Though the film never explicitly names it, many viewers today recognize the symptoms as consistent with PTSD. The Waco Kid is retreating from a world that broke him, and Wilder never lets you forget that. Even when he's making you laugh, there's a hollowness in his voice, a pause that lingers too long, a hesitation in his eyes. These are not the choices of an actor trying to be funny. They're the choices of someone who knows that comedy and sorrow are often just one breath apart. One of the film's most quoted lines, "You've got to remember, these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land."
You've got to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land.
The common clay of the New West, you know, morons, only works because of Wilder's delivery. He doesn't smirk or wink. He doesn't even blink. The line lands like something he's believed for years, but never had the energy to say out loud until now. And it's that exhaustion, that quiet surrender, that made the Waco Kid something more than comic relief. He became the film's center of gravity. And the most ironic part? None of it was supposed to happen. Gene Wilder wasn't meant to be in Blazing Saddles at all. His casting was an emergency, a last-minute fix. But instead of patching a hole, he rewired the foundation. Every chaotic beat of the movie leaned on his restraint. Without him, it might have spun out of control. With him, it became something more layered than anyone expected, a comedy with pain just beneath the surface. And now, decades later, we finally know that was the point all along. What got cut? The scenes you never saw. Did you know Blazing Saddles was almost a much darker, more emotionally complex film than the version we know today? Beneath the jokes about baked beans, punched horses, and townspeople named Johnson, there once existed a far more introspective cut, one that gave space to pain, regret, and personal collapse. At the center of it all was Gene Wilder, playing a character whose quiet despair wasn't just an acting choice. It was the emotional anchor that once shaped the film's core. But most of those scenes, they never made it to the final edit. And what got cut has only grown more legendary with time. Mel Brooks would later describe Blazing Saddles not as a mainstream hit in the making, but as an esoteric little picture, something made for radicals, film nerds, and people who draw on the washroom wall. That was his original vision, a nush, incendiary satire that might not even reach a wide audience. In keeping with that spirit, the original cut of the film reportedly included a far more explicit version of the Lily von Stupp bedroom scene. According to Brooks, the studio forced him to cut a line they deemed far too racy for the time, something involving a very unambiguous comment about Lily's anatomy that pushed the boundary of 70s comedy. While the exact wording has never been officially published, Brooks has hinted in interviews that it's the only joke in his career the studio outright refused to allow. It's a reminder that even in a film famous for pushing boundaries, some moments were still considered too provocative to survive, and that what did make it to screen was only part of the defiant, unruly vision Brooks and his team had in mind. The film's cultural commentary, however, remained intact, thanks in large part to Richard Pryor. Pryor, who helped co-write the script, demanded train fare and a bottle of brandy before agreeing to join the writer's room, but once inside, he left a permanent mark. His influence is especially clear in the way Blazing Saddles handled racism, not just as a punchline, but as a direct attack on America's sanitized image of itself. The frequent and uncomfortable use of the N-word, something that Pryor specifically defended, wasn't designed to shock for its own sake. It was used to expose the raw, unfiltered ugliness beneath the mythology of the American West. Although Pryor was the original choice to play Sheriff Bart, the studio rejected him over insurance concerns tied to his reputation and substance use. Cleavon Little took the role instead and delivered an iconic performance, but Pryor's fingerprints remained in every line, scene, and moment of truth-telling satire. Years later, fans would also discover that Blazing Saddles had a largely forgotten spin-off attempt, a TV pilot titled Black Bart, featuring Louis Gossett Jr. The series never aired beyond its pilot, but it underscored just how difficult it was to recapture the film's brutal honesty without Pryor's biting voice behind the scenes. One of the most unexpected casting twists in the film's development came before Wilder or Gig Young were ever considered. Mel Brooks personally approached John Wayne, yes, the John Wayne, and offered him the role of the Waco Kid. Wayne took the script home, read it, and came back the next day with a smile. According to Brooks, Wayne told him, "I can't do this. It's too dirty, but I'll be the first in line to see it." It's a bizarre and fascinating what-if moment in Hollywood history. Had Wayne accepted, Blazing Saddles might have been anchored by an entirely different kind of energy, perhaps more stoic, more traditional, and far less subversive. Instead, his refusal opened the door for a much weirder, sadder, and ultimately more powerful portrayal by Wilder, who turned the role into a meditation on disillusionment hidden beneath comedy. The film also sparked a real-world lawsuit from a Hollywood legend. Hedley Lamar, the Austrian-born actress and inventor, filed a lawsuit against Warner Brothers, claiming that the name Hedley Lamar, used for the film's villain, infringed on her privacy and commercial rights. She demanded $100,000 in damages, asserting that the repeated joke was trading on her name and legacy. Warner Brothers settled the matter out of court and issued an apology, but not before Mel Brooks wrote a tongue-in-cheek reference to the dispute directly into the film, with Hedley repeatedly snapping at people, "It's Hedley, not Hetty!" What began as a genuine legal threat became an immortal punchline, and one of the earliest examples of a movie folding real-world controversy back into its narrative. Behind the camera, Gene Wilder's presence created another set of challenges, mainly that he was too funny. His dry delivery was so unexpected and subtle that crew members often burst into laughter in the middle of filming. Several takes had to be redone because sound engineers, boom mic operators, and even the camera crew couldn't keep from laughing out loud. Wilder's performance didn't read like a typical comedic turn. It felt like something deeper, almost tragic, which made his funniest moments land even harder. Mel Brooks himself had to step off set during multiple takes just to avoid ruining them with his own laughter. In one scene, the now iconic "these are just simple farmers, you know, morons" line, the cast reportedly broke down so many times that the crew nearly ran out of film. It wasn't just that Wilder was good, it was that no one expected the Waco Kid to be funny in that way, with a slow burn instead of a bang. Even though many of the Waco Kid's deeper scenes were cut, the emotional weight of those lost moments still lingers in the performance we got. In Wilder's voice, there's a kind of weariness, a resignation that tells you he's not just drunk, but emotionally exhausted. Without Wilder's restraint, Blazing Saddles might have collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. Ultimately, it's that restraint and the hints of what could have been that continue to fascinate audiences 50 years later. The missing scenes remain a point of speculation. Lost footage, trimmed monologues, and whispered confessions that never made it to the screen. Fans pore over old production memos, analyze stills, and rewatch interviews, trying to stitch together what might have been left on the cutting room floor. What we do know is this: Blazing Saddles was never just a comedy. It was a rebellion. Against Hollywood, against racism, against sanitized nostalgia. And in the heart of that rebellion was a man in a bunk, bottle in hand, quietly asking, "Are we awake?" We weren't. But maybe now, after all this time, we are. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.